Full disclosure, Doc was approached by the creators of this film to review it, and he got to watch it free of charge. Whether or not this affects Doc's review remains to be seen.
Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, with a short podcast-style review of a new indie horror flick titled The Inhabitants. I know what you're thinking. No, the movie is not about the knife-wielding vagrants currently occupying your basement. Oh, you didn't know about them? Oh, don't worry, you'll meet them soon. The Inhabitants tells the story of a couple who purchases a bed and breakfast. Ah! A very young couple buys this bed and breakfast, I might add. I don't know, it seems kinda weird to me. Buying a bed and breakfast sounds like the kind of thing you do when you're old and retired. Anyway, it's a horror flick, so there's something fucked up about the house. The first fucked up thing about the house that is established early on is that there are mysterious video cameras installed all over the place, but come on, it's a bed and breakfast. Of course there's hidden cameras. It's not weird when you think about it. The folks who are running bed and breakfasts all across the country are very lonely. They need all the footage of naked people they can get, okay? The couple doesn't really know about the cameras, but they do discover a dark history involving the house that they've purchased. Of course there's a dark history, but unlike other bed and breakfasts that make up a dark history to attract tourists, the couple discovers an actual, honest-to-goodness dark history. You see, there was this one, lady that did some dodgy stuff. I won't go into it because it's spoilers, I guess. There's not a whole lot to spoil in this movie, so I might as well not spoil whatever I can, okay? Know this, though. There's some supernatural stuff afoot. Like ghosts, I guess. I don't know if they're technically ghosts because the movie never states it, but they're basically ghosts. There are some ghosts sneaking around, doing ghost stuff, like shutting doors and looking at the couple while they're sleeping. Standard ghost stuff. The spirits have one other trick up their sleeves that I'll get into later, but for the most part, the ghosts don't really do anything scary or interesting. The ghosts pop up sometimes and they look kinda spooky. That's pretty much it. Okay, so if you want a good ghost movie, The Inhabitants isn't going to offer you anything new, but The Inhabitants is also a possession movie. Kind of, I guess. Jessica, the wife out of the husband and wife, is left alone in the new house by her husband Dan at one point in the movie when Dan the man goes out on a trip. During her time alone, just sort of moping around her new house for a while, Jessica becomes possessed by whatever is occupying her house, but it's not a scary kind of possession. Usually, when somebody gets possessed in a movie, they act really fucking strange and do terrifying shit. Jessica, though, while possessed, just becomes boring. Like, Jessica loses all personality after being possessed. The lady becomes a bland character walking around doing nothing. It was a serious bummer because there are only two main characters in this movie, and when Dan comes back to his wife and tries to figure out why she's suddenly so dull, the actor for Dan really struggles to carry this movie by himself for the second half. I just don't see why the writers of the film thought it would be a good idea to tank one of the few characters that the movie has, especially since nothing happens for most of the movie. I'm not even joking. Nothing major happens on the horror front until the last 10 minutes. Again, I'm serious. The rest of the movie is setup, and you know what? Setup is really good to have in a horror movie. But when, more than 80% of a horror movie is setup, there's something seriously fucking wrong. There are a lot of separate scenes where characters are piecing together the history of the house. A lot of foreshadowing, and not very subtle foreshadowing to boot. All the while, ghosts are sort of doing spooky stuff out of view occasionally. I kept hoping the ghosts would do something major before the movie was over, but they don't. Actually, that's not really true. The movie introduces a group of teens, I guess, that hang out near the bed and breakfast to smoke or something. These teens are only thrown into the movie so they can break into the haunted house for some reason and get killed off by the ghost to pad out the body count. They don't push the story forward at all, as far as I know. The good thing about the throwaway teens, though, is that there's some actual suspense in their scenes, which is unusual for this movie. Before the possession happens, I didn't even really buy that Jessica and Dan were married. The movie suggests that the two have been married for 7 or 8 years, I think, but the actors felt like they didn't know each other that well, and the scenes establishing their relationship gave me the impression that they've only been dating for maybe 6 months. There just wasn't much tension between this couple. They just seem to like each other, and that's all I can really say. The Inhabitants is a well put together movie, though. It's shot fine and looks pretty high rent compared to a lot of other low budget horror flicks. The Inhabitants also has some alright music and a nice atmosphere. It's just that nothing really happens to take advantage of the talents that the filmmakers demonstrate. Like, when the characters discover backstory info from a book, instead of cutting to a flashback showing off what the book describes, the movie instead just has some fancy close-ups of the text while the characters read it. It's a movie, you gotta show, not tell. There are also some really weird transitions at inappropriate times, especially an overuse of fading out and fading in. That's a serious nitpick, but it kind of bothered me seeing that transition all the time. The Inhabitants' faults may be all due to the low budget that the filmmakers mentioned to me. Having stuff happen in a movie is expensive, and it's extremely difficult being an indie filmmaker, but as it stands, the movie just isn't that scary or interesting. I was honestly bored while watching it. So little actually happens in this movie that I think they should have called it Paranormal Inactivity. The Inhabitants is lacking in scares and stuff for the characters to do. I cannot recommend it.
Stay with me.
Speaking of The Inhabitants, it's now available on video-on-demand services. Buy it now. Come on, do it.